I want to show some of these stocks, Tim, or at least some of these ETFs that track
Morning,
them,
Tom.
because they are up massively this morning. But I also want to put that in context. Over the last 3 to 5 years, these stocks have been at least hammered, and maybe that's putting it lightly, over the course of the past 3 to 5 years. So just how important is this new development?
Well, good morning, Dom. And I think that's a cannabis green tie you're wearing. I'm not sure. But and to be clear, I'm actually the portfolio manager of CNBS, which is an active cannabis ETF. And it's been a wild 6 years since we launched this fund. And it's certainly been one that's had a lot of promises or seemingly promises or Washington and macro that seemed like it was game on. What's happened in the industry over the last 2 weeks or so is there's been some sense that the industry, which has finally come together to lobby Washington, I think more appropriately, and you have a Trump administration that on the campaign trail was very clear that they were either in favor of cannabis, they certainly were in favor of removing a lot of the uncertainty around the sector and rescheduling from Schedule 1 to seemingly Schedule 3 is something that for people in the industry, but also for people outside of the industry, cannabis is kind of a bipartisan issue. This is hardly controversial. Proving cannabis as medicinally, efficacious and that it actually has a use is something that hasn't been that difficult. And under the Biden administration, the FDA put out a 208-page memo saying that, in fact, it did have medicinal use. So that's the dynamic here. Rescheduling from Schedule 1 to 3, so going from the same as LSD and heroin to something that actually does provide medical benefit is something that would change the tax structure of the industry and would be a game changer.
All right, Tim, there's also a ton of confusion, even from some people who are part of this ecosystem with regard to just what the business outlook is, given the legal and regulatory framework, both at the state and federal level for these. Because even if there are many states now where you can buy cannabis-related products, yet at the same time, many of those places still have restrictions on the types of sales that can happen. And there is a whole federal versus state who's got more influence over a particular market. How difficult is that for an investor to overcome to want to be in some of these types of stocks?
Well, what you're referring to is that state by state, cannabis has been made either there's an adult market, there's a medical market, there's a recreational market that's been approved, and if you follow the move of the states, it's been a one-way and very consistent move. It's been a steady march. States are approving cannabis. If you think about where we are for the industry, from the hemp-derived THC is something that also has been controversial because hemp was legalized through the Farm Bill, and this is all complicated stuff. If you're an investor and have not necessarily been following this sector for the last 10 years like I have, but if you think about where we are, the dynamic is that this is arguably, an $80 billion market right now. If you add up adult, medical, illicit, and there's no question to me where the top line is growing. There's no question that consumers who've been looking for exposure to this kind of growth, it's there. Does not mean that it won't be a complicated trade, but it does mean that you're investing now well ahead of a lot of institutional capital if you are, in fact, investing into this sector.